It's been 5 years since Cuphead was released to critical and commercial acclaim. Selling over 6 million copies, Cuphead has bridged the gap between new school game design and old school action games like Contra and Gunstar Heroes, with a beautiful looking fresh coat of paint in the form of 1930s hand-drawn cartoons. Now in 2022, the highly anticipated DLC, known as the Delicious Last Course, has been released to the public. Let's take a look.
Hello, I'm the Nostalgia.
A bad credit card!
Congratulations! What? We waited this long for animation that looks like garbage? That's what I'm talking about. That was absolutely worth the wait. After taking the time to polish their new content, Studio MDHR hits another home run. The success of the Cuphead brand has led to cameos in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, a toy line at Arby's, aka, the greatest eating establishment of all time after, of course, the Chum Bucket, and an animated Netflix original series with episodes coming out in the month of August. If the content is like this, why should I care if it's late? Sorry, Cyberpunk fanboys, I hate to offend. The best part of this is that it costs the same as a McDonald's combo meal. On top of all that, the amount of content that they gave the fanbase for their patience makes me feel like a spoiled, rotten child. As is, I would have loved this game even if the DLC never happened, but I have no complaints about what we have here. A huge part of the charm for me personally is the iconic art style. Much like games such as Persona 5, Team Fortress 2, Minecraft, and the Spyro the Dragon trilogy, I consider Cuphead's art style among my all-time favorites in gaming. The obsessive hand-drawn nature of the frames in this old Disney cartoon-style game will always hold dear to me, and I can't think of one aspect that I didn't appreciate at least a little bit. Therefore, this DLC is a blessing because the risk was low and the reward was limitless. Call me a happy customer. Now it's time to break down the extra content of one of my favorite video games of all time. The new DLC comes loaded with 3 new weapons, 3 new charms, 12 new bosses, and an entirely new Inkwell Isle. To help me discuss this new package and report footage is my fellow gamer Alex, or as he's known on YouTube, Nicholas Rage.
How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned? How'd it get burned?
Hey guys, as the resident self-proclaimed gamer, I'm honored to join the legendary and extremely sexy Reviewer Beware. I played through the entire game on normal, cried to my mom, and then went back and finished the DLC in expert mode because
I enjoy pain.
the footage you see in the background will feature expert mode as well as normal mode. And before you ask, no, I did not try simple mode because I'm a big boy who's allowed to stay up after 7 p.m. and watch shows made for adults like Caillou and JJ the Jet. Now before we begin, let's get the boring part out of the way. If you like this video, check out my social media accounts in the links below. I talk about music as well as video games. Now that the introduction's over, let's begin the
Pain.
The Delicious Last Course includes 3 new weapons: the Crack Shot, the Converge, and the Twist Up. Oh look, it's the best weapon in the game! Well, that's obviously debatable, but this is definitely a contender. The Crack Shot starts off as a single shot and quickly transforms into a homing bullet similar to the Chaser. The damage output is very high for the single shot, but surprisingly the homing shot is pretty destructive as well. 99% of the boss fights are weak to the Crack Shot, and so are the enemies that litter the stage. All the new weapons are useful, but if I had to pick one, I'd go with this. It works well for newer players who have trouble aiming their shots, yet is also great for speedruns due to the insane damage it can deal.
The Crack Shot is not only my favorite of the new weapons, it is probably one of my favorite weapons in the game in any capacity. If you use your EX ability, you'll create a sentry gun that will shoot for you, and since it's pink, it can also be parried off of. As you can imagine, this allows you to break the game in any close quarters fight. It definitely comes with a lot of the same advantages exhibited with the Chaser, but you're also improving upon a much more limited damage output.
Next up is the Converge, a 3-way lightning bolt weapon similar to the spread gun. It has a very long range and pierces through targets while dealing a fair bit of damage. I don't really have much to say about this weapon as I feel it's not bad, but rather middle of the road. I used it in the Angel and Devil fight as well as the Chef fight, but I never really felt like I had to use it. It's very versatile and reliable, but it doesn't do much to stand out besides being used to clear out rows of enemies. The crowd control ability is probably its best feature since the DLC is chock full of little minions.
The Converge has a bit of a narrow range, but my favorite part is the piercing mechanic that allows you to demolish the smaller enemies during boss fights. To keep it short, it's a decent gun, but it needs a primary weapon to carry it.
Lastly, we have the Twist Up. I was really excited to try this weapon out because it's a direct reference to the air shooter ability for Mega Man 2, one of my favorite games of all time. However, it's probably the most situational of all the new weapons. It deals a very high amount of damage and it's super useful against bosses who tower above you, which the DLC has plenty of, but when the targets are grounded, you have to get dangerously close to deal any kind of damage at all. It's good to have as a secondary weapon to complement other weapons that can't reach as high, such as the lava or spread. In particular, the Twist Up is strong against the Moonshine Mob and Glumstone the Giant.
The Twist Up is very useful in a couple situations, namely during dog-on-dog fight and in a certain player's hands, perhaps some of the earliest portions of the DLC. It's beautifully animated, which counts for a large contingent of points for me, although I can't help but think the crack shot accomplishes more.
Along with the new weapons, the DLC also includes 3 new charms, the Astral Cookie, the Heart Ring, and the Broken Relic. One taste of the Astral Cookie will send you on a trip to heaven, and by that I mean you die. But you give your life for one of the best new features in the game, Miss Chalice. At first you might think, well, she looks fun, but I'm not ready to learn a new character in this Toughest Nails game video, so I'll just... Silence! Listen, this DLC was designed with Miss Chalice in mind. Learning how she plays is worth it for the doors she opens with her new abilities. She has a double jump, she has an extra hard point, a dash that parries, and a roll that makes her invincible. She's basically like 3 charms in one, but it's not like she makes the game a cakewalk since you can't use any charms with her. The dash often leaves you in a safer position when it comes to moving towards a target, but it can be dangerous when you parry on top of something or if you have to parry under an object. The invincibility roll is more useful than the mute button in a COD lobby, and it can save your ass many times. Miss Chalice comes with 3 new super abilities. Right off the bat, I say ignore the first and third superpowers and just go with the Shield Pal. The Spiral Pillar is very situational since it only attacks above and below you. The Ghostly Barrage is decent, but it just can't compete with the Shield Pal. With a Shield Pal lacks in damage, it makes up for in extremely useful utilities. If you're good with parries, you can stay alive forever, and you can even S-rank boss fights on Expert while still taking a hit.
This is saying quite a bit given everything Cuphead does well in their boss fight designs, but Ms. Chalice to me is most certainly the most exciting part of the delicious last course. The reason is because it's not so much that Ms. Chalice is superior to Cuphead, it's that she is different while not overshadowing Cuphead and Mugman. I enjoy the change of the mechanics to parry with a dash as opposed to a jump. Personally, I felt more engaged with the story of the last course because I exclusively used Chalice while playing the DLC. The double jump was very reliable in specific phases of the game that I'm convinced would have been a little more difficult with Cuphead.
The second charm is the Heart Ring. This allows you to heal yourself on the first, third, and sixth parry and hypothetically become an unkillable tank. I'd say this is a good choice, but it's a bit situational, just like the Twist Up. Miss Chalice kinda steals the show, and in my opinion, her shield ability sorta makes this redundant. Not to mention, you won't always have a parry available, especially when it's determined by enemies who will only sometimes launch parryable attacks, such as the horses in Esther's level. However, the Heart Ring is very helpful in flying levels where you can't bring in weapons that aren't charms. It was super helpful for the Esther battle, and I'm sure it would be good for revisiting the King Dice fight. So in summary, it's a bit overshadowed by the Astral Cookie, but it's a good choice when there's so many opportunities to parry. The broken relic is the strangest charm of the bunch. Honestly, Josh and I haven't really experimented with it too much, but basically it's used to unlock a secret boss fight and it can be upgraded into the cursed relic and the divine relic. This is more or less an extra feature, almost like a side mission after beating the game. So we're just going to put the Sonichu medallion back on the shelf.
Now that we've gone through the new mechanics and abilities, it's time for what you came here to see, the main course. Alex and I have come up with our own personal tier list which rank every single new boss based on their difficulty. D tier is for the easiest bosses, while S tier is for the hardest ones. Both of us play the game in a completely different way with different strategies and preferences. We have a lot to say, so let's get started. The King's Leap is an improvement on a tool to teach parrying over the Mausoleum levels. It's because unlike those levels, you learn situational parrying. Where this matters is when you realize that all bosses offer you completely different objects to parry. You have to remember, Cuphead is an angle and positioning game as much as it is a shooter. It's a combination of platformers like Crash Bandicoot as well as shooters like Mega Man that lead to a lot of Smash controllers and YouTube rage videos that I enjoy over a bowl of popcorn and a beer.
The first boss is one of the most sadistic, horrifying, and nail-bitingly difficult fights in all of gaming. The Pawns. Nah, I'm just kidding, they're easy as shit. I'll admit that before the DLC came out, it was about half a year since I played Cuphead, so my playing skills were rusty to say the least, but even I barely struggled with this fight at all. Doesn't matter which character you choose because parrying the heads is pretty easy. Just make sure you watch the pieces at the top to see which ones are jumping. That's really all there is to it. Definitely D tier.
Hey Alex, quit being judgmental. Not every boss can be the Dark Sith Lord of difficulty that is Waddle Dee in Kirby Superstar. In all seriousness, this is like taking warm-up jumpers before the big basketball game. This fight is just a matter of jumping and dashing quickly. You may have a bit of an adjustment period to worry about it if you're using Ms. Chalice, but this tests your instinctual movement and muscle memory, nothing more. D tier.
Next, we have one of the most frustrating of the King's Gauntlet fights. If you have ADHD, which unfortunately Josh and I both have. This fight is an absolute pain in the ass. The first 40 times I tried this fight, I could not stop dying. But then I realized the two tricks to beating this boss. 1, patiently wait until the horse attacks the strike. 2, use Miss Chalice. Miss Chalice's dash parry makes the horse's attacks a lot easier to deal with, as you can just run into them rather than time them perfectly. If you're fast, you can even get 3 hits in while the horse is panting. After dying so many times, I realized that the knight only has 3 attacks, so all you have to do is learn when each is going to come out and what they look like. You can even attack him after the uppercut if you're very fast, but you have to wait until his mohawk shakes for half a second. The window of opportunity is incredibly tiny. So in summary, this boss has a bit of a learning curve, but with practice, you can beat the knight without getting hit. Basically, he's a noob trap who's going in C tier.
This is by far the most irritating of the King's Leap fights functionally because it drove me up a wall to wait for this dumb donkey to bait me into these attacks and half of them be a lazy half uppercut that isn't even worth really parrying off of. If you're gonna tease me, at least take me out to dinner first and call me beautiful. Anyways, just read his face and dash right into his head. As long as you don't overdash, you could probably get 1 or 2 parries and back off. It takes 20 total. This isn't annoying because it's difficult, it's because the mechanics of having to back up, make a move, rinse and repeat is sore on the eyes. This boss, C tier.
After the knight, we have a really fun fight against the bishop. In a nice attention to detail, the bishop moves diagonally just like the chess piece does. The fight is pretty easy unless you're a dumbass like me who thought you had to snuff out the candles by parrying them and dashing through them. Yeah, I'm not really the brightest sometimes. If you stay in rhythm, this fight shouldn't be too hard. D tier.
The bishop is a matter of having a consistent strategy of what order to put out the flames as you parry off the rotating head towards the middle. It's a very cleverly animated battle, especially the hilarious court gesture faces spinning right towards you that just happens to look like Mickey Rourke post-plastic surgery. Unlike the knight, you do not feel the fight is longer than it actually is. It's definitely going to be a lot easier to have the right movements than to move frantically. Think about the rotation precisely as everything is bouncing and you'll be alright. C tier.
The most difficult boss of the King's Gauntlet is the Rook, but that's like being the least embarrassing Quantum TV video. The fight starts off with him fantasizing about the hottest guillotine I've ever seen in my life. You know what? I'm done with this video.
Nope, we're not doing that. We're not doing that.
Anyways, in order to beat this boss, you have to parry the heads back into his face, almost like a match of volleyball. The only thing that kept killing me in this fight was the little spark on the ground. It's so tiny that half the time I forgot it even existed, and it caused me to take a lot of hits. Besides that, and occasionally a few weird physics mishaps, there's not much to say, so it's gonna go in C tier.
The toughest and best of the bosses here. You are playing volleyball with your parries in order to lay hits on the Rook. For the early portion of the fight, simple enough. Don't let the skull smash you, volley away. However, you have to be prepared to think of your landing spots as you're hitting airborne. So basically, it's one of those battles where you have to be very anticipatory. It's certainly difficult to get the hang of for a little bit, but once you have the patience to understand what it means to avoid being closed in on, you're good to go. B tier.
The last of the King's challenges is surprisingly not the King, but the Queen. Just like the Queen in chess, she moves all around the screen. The only way to attack her is with the cannons. This aspect really reminds me of the final boss of Yoshi's Island with Baby Bowser, and you actually have to employ a similar strategy to beat her. There's a bit of an arc to the cannonball, so you can hit her if you line it up just right. At this point, the fight shouldn't be that hard for you as long as you understand how the cannons work. Despite being the final parry challenge, it's not that difficult, so I'm going to put this one in D tier.
Revere Beware is much like all of you. I do have a celebrity queen. Nicolas Cage. I was a little disappointed that you could get away with missing quite a few of your parries on the cannons as projectiles, and there's a lack of real punishment for doing such. There were so many times where I was trying to dash into the cannons, missed, and because of the projectiles above being so slow, I never felt punished for it. This just felt like it should have started things off because it is one of those situations where the climax isn't particularly satisfying. All you really have to do is dash your way through the projectiles, and that's why I have to put this in D.
The first real boss fight is actually pretty challenging. But before I go into that, I just gotta say that I love the dimly lit, moody atmosphere and 1930s mobster aesthetic of this stage. Great character designs as always. Now, one thing that really bugs me about this phase is that I swear that this spider is based off a 1940s Looney Tunes cartoon I saw when I was 7, but I could not for the life of me remember anything about it. It was in color and it featured a group of flies working together to kill a creepily animated spider. If you know what I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. I couldn't find anything about it through research, so I'm kinda stumped. Maybe it's the Mandela effect. Maybe it never existed in the first place. Maybe I don't exist. Putting that insane rambling tangent aside, the spider fight isn't too hard on its own, but there are a lot of things going on to distract you, and the spider can pop out at any of the 6 corners, like the Lolo and Lala fight from the Kirby games. The boss fight can be a bit unpredictable, but he gives you a lot of opportunities to attack him, especially when he's talking on the phone.
I thought I heard someone say something, spider, spider. I thought it was Henry.
You know you're a mumbling, stuttering little... You know that?
The next part is against the light bug. As you can see from this footage, I was an absolute moron during this fight, and I thought that every single line of music hurt you, so I tried to dodge them all, but in reality, you only have to worry about the red ones. Think of it like a stoplight, I guess. I love how the music becomes muffled and faded with everything turning red. It's a very nice touch. There are multiple ways to win here, either by staying in the middle of the stage or by attacking from below. If you're using Miss Chalice or the Smoke Dash, I recommend rolling towards the music lines instead of away from them. The last phase is one I struggle with a lot. This damn anteater's tongue has gotten me killed so many times. I was so fed up with this fight that I learned a super lazy strategy. All you have to do is stay in the middle of the stage and fire twist-up tornadoes at each side. You can also parry the tongue, but it's not even necessary if you use my cowardly strat. Hell yeah! I killed it! Time to teabag after a hard what? Are you kidding me? Did they just pull a King K. Rool fake out ending? The mob doesn't play fair. Fortunately, the snail can be whacked in 5 seconds. The Moonshine mob goes in B tier.
The first phase is definitely made much easier if you use the chaser or the roundabout to cover any enemies coming against you, as they are a version of the devil's minions, but the boss above isn't throwing nearly as much projectiles. You can easily use Miss Chalice to double jump and slowly move up and down. You're going to basically slowly climb up and down. Do not ride the corners during this fight. You don't want to be right in the middle. My advice is to position yourself just a little left of the middle. The second phase is going to be brutal, unless you ride the middle of the map, ironically. You need to follow the path of the waves being set forth using Ms. Chalice to double jump to avoid the path which moves clockwise. Being at the bottom and only jumping no higher than the middle row is the most productive path you could take. The Chaser and Twist-Ups are two of the most stand-up weapons for this phase. There's a great subtlety to the Anteater's tongue movement in Phase 3. I would try and count out a 3 or 4 count and make sure you are spending a limited amount of time on each platform. During this fight, you should have the Shield Pal equipped. I'm not saying that the Spiral Pillar and Ghostly Barrage cannot be useful, but I like to point out that the Shield Pal is the equivalent of a banned Yu-Gi-Oh card that can break the game when used in succession with good moves. Do not get caught slipping when the Anteater's screen says knockout, because you quickly have one more kill to make. But you should be fine as long as you don't act like a runner that already won the race and trip at the finish line and get passed up. This boss is going in B tier.
Being one of the first selectable boss fights must mean this guy's easy, right?
No!
As you might have noticed, the DLC has a bit of a bullet hell fetch. These boss fights are filled with dangerous enemies in every section of the screen. I can imagine the reason why this took so long to make was because the devs tried their best to make sure there's something dangerous lurking in every pixel. All jokes aside, these devs are geniuses for being able to plan out all these complicated boss scenarios. Glumstone the Giant is based off the 1933 Betty Boop cartoon, The Old Man on the Mountain, featuring a giant voiced by Cab Calloway, the inspiration for King Dice. I recommend this cartoon just for the jam and jazz tunes, although do be aware that the old man is a bit, Cosby-ish. The Glumstone fight takes a lot of practice, all because of these little gnomes. Make sure to kill them as often as possible to avoid a massive headache. This first phase is even harder on Expert because you actually have to jump into the dangerous gnome hat spikes when he sends a bear after you. That's a sentence I never thought I'd say. The platforms also have some RNG when it comes to moving, so you really can't rely on any single platform. My advice is to deal as much damage as possible with a roundabout or spread gun, just so you can get this part over with. It's risky, but I like staying close to him to maximize my damage output. The second phase can be rough if you're not paying attention. I can't even count how many hits I took from the gnomes below, but at least you can see them enter Glumstone's greasy neckbeard, so you're given time to move out of the way. Luckily, the ball itself wasn't that difficult to dodge. The final phase takes a page from Yoshi's Island's boss fight, Prince Froggy, where you fight inside the giant's stomach. Man, the DeviantArt crowd's gonna love this game. This part is definitely challenging, but it can be managed by constantly pairing the pink platforms and understanding what the chicken and bones do. Some of these DLC fights can be tough just because you're not sure what the fight's rules are, but never tell yourself you can't beat these bosses no matter how scary the situation looks. Weapons like the Twist Up and Crack Shot are good here since the boss is high up. Eventually he'll go down, and just because of the craziness of the first phase, he's going in A tier.
I think I probably died at first because I thought based on appearance I was fighting Harvey Weinstein. Advisable options for this fight include the spread for the early phase and either the Chaser or, if you have it, the Crack Shot. The thing that makes this a surprisingly tough early portion of the DLC is the amount of maintenance you have to worry about below your feet. such as falling onto spikes or the fact that a large portion of gnomes are attacking low. You have to make sure you are looking at what's coming right at your face as well as under, because there is a horizontal war at hand. I find the second phase to work kind of like the 8-ball mini-boss during King Dice. It's a matter of slight positioning adjustment to avoid being nailed by the ball, all while firing the heaviest arsenal you can. The last phase is exactly why I would say your best bet is to have that free hit super more than any other. There's not a lot of purpose to a horizontal super that's attacking you above vertically, and with Cuphead offering little in the ways of invincibility frames as a game, the spiral pillar would leave you very vulnerable to getting hit. Take your extra hit with you, use the chaser, and worry about dashing to safety on the skeletons, as well as focusing on what's being thrown down to clip your ankle, and you'll skate home safely. I'm putting this in A tier.
Next, we have Mortimer Freeze, another awesome character design and another challenging fight. Mortimer's first fight is pretty easy, but we have to mention it just because of the fact he uses whales and attack. The second phase is the hardest, with the giant snowman who reminds me of the Yellow Devil from Mega Man. The snowman's animations are very fluid, and like IGN would say, it really makes you feel like a snowman, because this dude is gonna melt you. A lot. So many things can kill you here. For example, these douchebags. The popsicles seem easy to hit, but you probably forget about them when trying to dodge the snowman's avalanche of attacks. It took me a while to learn the difference between his two rolling attacks. One goes forward, the other goes upward, so Miss Chalice's dodge ability is extremely helpful here. The swords are tricky to dodge as well, especially in expert mode where they take up the entire screen. It's worth noting that this attack pays tribute to Heisen Ko from Capcom's Darkstalkers and Juggernaut's Earthquake attack from the Marvel fighting games, which were a big part of my childhood. The last phase is tricky but never gave me a huge problem. The attacks are relatively slow and predictable. Even though the stage moves in a Ferris wheel-like motion, Miss Chalice's double jumps makes it a lot easier to handle. The eyeball attack looks scary, but the pattern it moves in is clear, and it can be bypassed with the smoke dash or Miss Chalice's roll, putting this fight in B tier.
The first thing I did during the second phase was die wondering why I have to live in this cold existence where two movies named Jack Frost exist and either have Michael Keaton with snow boobs or is a terrible horror movie. I definitely got a little bit overwhelmed upon learning this fight due to how fast the motions were falling at me, especially because this relies on a lot of dashing. This was basically my first time I got a feel for the crack shot, especially because how much everything bounced off the phase on the snow. I definitely must admit that for all the fights where the shield pal helped me, none more here. Mechanics aren't that tricky, but it's one of those fights that has plenty of over dashing, so you better make sure your jumps are precise, especially on the swords. The extra hit should be saved for the last phase only because of the eyeball that is coming right at you on screen. Even then, the last phase is strangely the easiest part of what is probably the most well-balanced fight in terms of difficulty. I am putting it in B tier.
And now we have my favorite boss fight, the Howling Aces. The animation here is absolutely breathtaking. I cannot imagine how long this took to draw, especially the extremely detailed giant dog plane. The bulldog fight isn't too complicated. You might die a few times at first, but the patterns aren't that difficult to figure out. He's basically a mix between Spike from Tom and Jerry, Rolento from Street Fighter, and Winston Churchill from, well, reality. While I do like the design, he did cause the Bengal famine of 1943, so I guess we're gonna have to kill him. The next phase is one of the most stressful, controller-breaking, and time-consuming fights in all of gaming. Nah, I'm just kidding. The puppies are easy. They have really small health bars, and their projectiles are slower than Team Fortress 2's update schedule. If you can't beat these guys, I recommend this place. The last phase is where things get tricky because of this bitch. Get it? Because she's a female dog? I promise I'm not sexist. I know 3 women. I actually love her character design. The animators did a great job making her look pouty and snobbish. She's clearly inspired by Cammy White, a very popular character from Street Fighter. Now, the reason why Cammy's popular is because She has a wonderful personality. Getting back on track, this phase introduces some new gimmicks that flip the screen and thus also flip your controls while moving. This might seem like a cheap attempt to make the fight harder, but the dog bowl attacks and lasers have clear patterns, so it's a very fair fight. The red bowls move along the ground, and the yellow bowls move in the air. I recommend using the crack shot for the parts where the screen flips so you can just focus on dodging the attacks. Honestly, I'm terrible at video game sections that force you to adapt to control changes, but even I was able to beat this fight on Expert, putting this one in B tier just because of the last phase. I bet the DeviantArt crowd loves these guys. Maybe I should look up some fan art. Oh no, she's hot!
Dog on Dog Fight is one of the most mechanically unique, if not a little jarring fights I have seen in this game, and I am so here for it. The dog animations in the second phase are really good as they light up the screen with their wide faces. Use the crack shot for this fight, especially during said second phase, whereas your other loadout should probably be the twist up. The first phase is pretty hard to learn, but the mastering of it isn't terrible. Truth be told, the crack shot can be abused the entire fight here, as long as you have the right positioning and look off to your sides, which makes the second phase a bit of a breeze. The third phase will test your composure, as you are dealing with the rotating screen, which tricks you into believing the controls of the fight are not what they actually are. But even with how much everything is rotating, you have to tell yourself it's not an entirely different control scheme. Watch your jumps based on the dog bowls, especially because you are dealing with a phase built to trick the intuition of its player. The lasers are not really that hard to deal with as long as you focus on the straight line. Therefore, it can be concluded that the third phase is all about not deceiving yourself. This fight is going in B tier.
Next, we have another exciting and well-animated fight that actually managed to make me laugh. See, this is what I love about Cuphead. It's full of surprises. The creativity is astounding. What other game has hot dogs and a box of hot dogs as a boss? Ignoring the aesthetics, this is a very tough fight. As the only flight level in the DLC, you have very limited safe spaces and you can always have something attacking you at all times. You can't rely on strong weapons like the crack shot or the roundabout, so you'll have to use your own wits and intuition. And it's not like the first phase is easy but the rest are hard, they're all challenging. Picking the easiest phase is like picking the best Nickelback song, it's impossible. In my opinion, the hardest attacks to dodge are the falling safes and the sausage links. There's just so much bouncing around the screen that it can be an absolute nightmare, especially in expert mode. While the attacks all have cues that let you know when they're being unleashed, there's so much to keep track of you'll probably forget something and take a hit from time to time. If you're having trouble with this boss fight, try using the health on parry chunk. Because of the onslaught of attacks, this fight is going in S tier, and in my opinion, it's the second hardest fight in the DLC.
This fight is very similar to Dr. Call's robot. Why? Dr. Call was fun and nightmarishly difficult, and Esther is also fun and nightmarishly difficult. I have an appreciation for fight levels because I kind of enjoy when my options are limited and I have to manage with the hand I've been dealt. There is not a single easy phase in this fight. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the incredible country fiddle music score we have going here, and the fact that some of the hardest parts of this fight come from the hilarious animations, especially as a wiener dog is running at me and shooting steak at me. That's hilarious! Phase 2 of this fight has you needing to do a reverse of Wally Warble's feather phase, where you have to be anticipatory and steer as you're being spammed behind your back, as well as weave through money in the same way you had to dodge Jimmy's jewelry. Phase 3 takes a little bit of concentration on how fast you can weave through those stakes, and this is probably the phase you should be saving your super for, although you have to be careful about how close you are to the flying stakes so your super is not wasted. In my opinion, Phase 4 is one of the hardest Cuphead phases of all time, and I was a broken shell of a man after dying one hit away twice in a row. If you have a super, don't use your entire meter because there is little of a chance to comfortably get a shot off without touching a wiener. What makes this even harder is just because you land a hit doesn't mean you can simply escape being nailed by the crossfire. You are best off holding the fire button and looking as tightly as possible for the openings to weave your way out. The difficulty is so rewarding for some of the best boss fight music in the game and some of the strangest animations. This fight is going in S tier and S tier in my heart.
The hardest fight in all of the DLC, and in fact maybe one of the hardest fights in any video game ever made, is against Walter. To dodge the pistol, you have to jump over the bullets, kind of like the Nostalgia Critic fight. As for the crowbar attack, duck under the crowbar. Now, Donnie may be out of his element, but Donnie's also after blood. So...
Chef Saltbaker. All I can say is, wow. Studio MDHR really saved the best for last. The animation here is phenomenal. It's on the level of a classic Disney cartoon. But while Disney is an evil corporation bent on world domination, these are just a few humble animators who had to painstakingly hand draw hundreds, maybe even thousands of animation frames for this one fight that lasts about 2 to 3 minutes total. But for the player, these 2 to 3 minutes can feel like 2 to 3 hours, as this is easily the hardest fight in the entire DLC. Before we go over it, let's quickly talk about the character a bit. First of all, did anyone not predict that he'd end up being the villain? I mean, he even looks evil. He gives off similar vibes to the psychotic French chef from The Little Mermaid. This loathsome monster mercilessly butchers the most overly adorable ingredients a la Sausage Party, so it looks like we're gonna have to throw stones at his glass house. Did I just write that? Oh my god, is my writing corny. So what makes this fight hard? Well, just look at the screen. Here are 4 different attacks coming towards you at once, all with different patterns and all coming from different angles. I've died so many times, and the irony is that only the first 2 phases are hard. More on that later. I would recommend the Chaser and the Crack Shot for this fight. Unlike Josh, I'm not a big fan of the Chaser's low damage output, but with all the projectiles going up your ass at once, your main focus should be dodging rather than aiming. Saltbaker doesn't move in the first 2 phases anyway, so it's not like he's hard to hit. The second phase is also tricky because you now have even less room and you can't cheese it with super attacks, since you now have to attack the Pepper Shakers while dodging those fire bastards and Woodman's falling leaf attack. The Crack Shot surprisingly does a lot of damage to the Pepper, so I'd recommend it. Strangely, the fight gets a lot easier after the second phase. The next phase goes by super fast with the boss who has even less health than the puppies. It basically just exists to hurt the players who haven't prepared. Lastly, we have a tumble with Saltbaker's Cold-Blooded Heart, another easy phase that's more about platforming than boss fighting. Miss Chalice's double jump makes this even easier, but if you don't have her, just parry into the heart. This is one of the few times where Crackshot will miss a lot, so I recommend using the Chaser here instead. The heart doesn't shoot projectiles, and all it really does is bounce around the screen. Despite the last phases being a cakewalk, this boss goes in S tier just for the controller smashing moments of the first 2 phases. However, you might get lucky like I did and glitch the game out for an easy win after the first phase. I have no clue what I did, but I'll definitely take that hard-earned achievement. Well, turns out that a few days ago, the PC version got patched, so this bug no longer exists. Hey, maybe that means they can patch in...
The Devil was a notably difficult final boss because of a brutally long first phase, and this fight, without the right strategy, becomes 2 brutally long phases in a row. Finally, we have a boss fight where the boss actually towers above the player, which makes the fight feel like the worthy epic to this story that it's supposed to be. The Chaser cannot be seen as obsolete in favor of the Crack Shot in this battle, and this fight reminds me why I will stand by my loyalty to the Chaser when it's needed. The diagonal mechanics actually meet their foil during the first phase. There is not enough of a safety net to easily get off a shot of the Crack Shot in the middle due to almost all projectiles hitting the center of the platform. Bring forth the Chaser and be patient for a grind or die first phase. The second phase is where the Crack Shot can make its return. Alex actually spoke gospel that I want to share. Do not worry about the top 2 shakers and attack the ones at the bottom if you want to avoid making the second phase much longer than it has to be. The third phase goes back to the Chaser being your go-to, as you're dealing with an advanced version of Cuphead Grande that quickly transitions into a slightly less climactic version of the Devil. If you have your meter filled here, and of course use the mighty shield pal, you can use your Chaser Crackshot, climb the ladder, and it's done. Overall, the early portion of the fight might leave you bloodied before you get there, but like every other Cuphead fight, this too shall pass. This boss is going in S tier.
But wait a minute, we're not done yet. There's still the secret and mysterious angel and devil fight. The most interesting thing about this skirmish is that you can toggle the attacks from harmless to dangerous by looking away from them. This has to be a reference to the cult classic bullet hell shoot 'em up Ikaruga, where you switch between dodging and firing blue and red bullets. Ikaruga was developed by Treasure, who created Gunstar Heroes, Cuphead's inspiration, so you just know that MDHR were fans. This fight is another noob trap because when you first play it, you're going to be very confused by how it works. But when you figure it out, the fight goes by very quickly. There aren't many attacks and there aren't many phases. It almost feels like an unfinished fight and we are both a little disappointed in it, but at least we are given some extra content, so we really can't be too mad. My advice for the fight is to not even worry about switching the colors and use the crack shot to deal damage. Then also use Miss Chalice's roll or Cuphead's smoke dash to go through the screen hogging lasers. This fight goes in B tier for me.
Well, I start as an angel when I play and turn into a demon when Grim Match Prick kills me on the last phase for the 49th time. So this boss is my entire time playing this game. It's my internal monologue. Aesthetically, this is actually one of my favorite fights in the game. There is a haunting and almost stop motion like quality to the fact that the devil's skeleton is right in the back of the fight looming. The heaven and hell religious paradox is unique, in which you are always having to fight whoever you are turned towards. Unfortunately, the problem with this trick is that once you know what to do, the difficulty unfortunately tanks. It's a fight where learning what it takes to beat it is way harder than actually executing what you find out what it is. It's a bit of a weird fight to get used to, as it's only one phase. The fight is a respectable gimmick that doesn't quite pan out, because it eventually devolves to very few movements and very few attacks needed. This ambitious concept felt like it wasn't quite suited for this game. Difficulty wise, it's going in C tier. Well, it looks like we've covered every single boss, and that brings us back to the topic at hand. Should you buy the Cuphead DLC?
Yes! Yes!
At only $8, this extra content is one of the best bargains we've ever seen in the history of gaming.
Every single level was baked with a cup of love, 2 teaspoons of wonderful animation, and 3 pints of kickingly hard game design that will challenge even the best of gamers who can beat Dark Souls blindfolded on top of a tightrope. But even then, it never becomes too unfair for the player. Finally, we have DLC that isn't just a yearly re-release palette swap like the milk franchises that EA and Activision out every month. The delicious last course proves that you can't rush a masterpiece, and in the words of Shigeru Miyamoto, a delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad.
Thank you for watching today's video. Like, comment, subscribe to Reviewer Beware and Nicholas Rage. Thank you.